Good morning, friends out there. Tony Pellegrini with our monthly podcast of teaching and learning at Southern Utah University. We're just tickled to have you on board today. With our guest for us today, we have Danielle Lydia Sheather, who is an assistant professor of dance in our college, our university. Last year, she won the Distinguished Scholarly Creative Activity Award from the Provost's office, and we just wanted to honor her and visit with her about some of the wonderful opportunities that she's been engaged with here at Southern Utah University. Danielle, could you tell us? Welcome. Thank you so very much for being here this morning with us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You are very welcome. It's just a pleasure. Danielle, could you tell us maybe a little bit about your background? What brought you to SUU?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been studying dance, I wouldn't say rigorously since I was 3, but definitely started dancing at a young age, of similar story to most young girls. And I grew up in Canada, but my dad's American. So as soon as I was born, he traipsed across the street to the American embassy and got myself birth abroad papers. So I have dual citizenship. So my primary education in dance was in Canada, and occasionally in the United States, we would go to Buffalo for workshops and things like that. And then I did my undergraduate at the University at Buffalo. I don't know if I'm allowed to admit this, but I'm not sure that I ever wanted to be an educator. Kind of fell in my lap. I danced professionally for a number of years and went back and got my master's at the University of Arizona. I got an MFA. I was a university fellow there. I had the opportunity to be a graduate teaching assistant there. I also had the opportunity to go study in Europe for 90 days. So I did the 90-day exact, so I didn't have to get a visa. Yeah. And I've managed to, secure a couple positions. So my first position out of grad school was at East Carolina University as an instructor. It was only supposed to be a semester commitment, but they kept me on for the year, which was lovely. And then I got a position at my alma mater at the University of Buffalo. And there I was, they call it a clinical assistant professor. So it's not a tenure track professor. So there's, different ways of being able to move up, but certainly different, different avenues. And then the tenure track position at SUU came up. I applied and here I am. I was hired to begin the jazz program here at Southern Utah University. So right now, jazz isn't necessarily a requirement at any other university in Utah. And having kind of been able to make a career out of everything. So I've been paid to do ballet. I've been paid to do jazz. I've been paid to do tap. I've been paid to do contemporary. And I value that experience. I think it's important to recognize all fields and all genres of dance. And I guess I feel like I'm living proof that can happen, even though sometimes in my career I was always told, you're going to have to choose. You're going to have to make a choice. And I feel very blessed to also be able to teach dance history. So that's what I do here. I'm considered the generalist because I can teach everything, but that's a little bit about me.
That is exciting. I've connected on so many levels with you. Just last night, I have a 3-year-old granddaughter. She was over and listening to music and couldn't stop dancing.
Yes.
We did not encourage her to stop dancing, I promise you.
Good.
Keep dancing.
Absolutely.
Love that. Tell us a little about how long have you been here at SUU and some of the interesting things maybe that you found with our university and with the learners, with whom you're connecting.
Sure. So I started in 2019, so I had about a semester and a bit of normalcy, and then COVID hit. And so I've been here since 2019. So I'm in technically in my 4th year, I guess, not completed yet. My goodness, the mountains, being 30 minutes away from Zion is just beautiful. Our first hike that my husband, so Mark Ferrier, he's an English professor here. Lecturer, I should say, sorry. We went to Canaraville, and it was amazing and it was beautiful. And how serendipitous, because we were taking all these pictures. And then, of course, the only one that his phone restarted, so the only one that we actually have is at the top of the trailhead. But we have these wonderful memories of, hiking in wastewater, deep waters, and it was just lovely. So that's been something that's very different. I've predominantly lived in cities. East Carolina University was in Greenville, North Carolina, so a little bit more rural, but not like this. And of course in the mountains. So that's been incredible. With respect to learners, culturally it's different here. Again, I come from a really big city atmosphere, so that's been, I'm a big fan of Dr. Nyama McCarthy-Brown's culturally responsive teaching. And I think it's really helpful to honor the lived experiences that are in the room and also create a space where there's an opportunity to come with your most authentic self, but also recognize that I don't know everything, you don't know everything, and together we'll learn another something. And I can't take credit for that. It comes from my mentor in grad school, Doug Nielsen. But I think there's a way to communicate and create together while maybe coming from different cultural backgrounds. So that's been something that's been sticking out with me for quite a time since I've been here.
Exciting. And your students relate well with that. They connect well with it.
Yeah. I mean, I do this beginning of the semester, again, not new, but important. I think we'd start with agreements. So I introduced some agreements that weren't necessarily in place when I was a professional dancer that could have made me feel safer or could have made me feel more secure. And I explained to them why I feel the way that I feel. And then the students come up with on their own and together and in groups. And then we discuss as a group, do you think that this is a way to move forward through the semester? You know, we don't take the whole class, but we certainly communicate in that way to make sure, but, you know, everybody feels comfortably physically, mentally, emotionally. And yeah, it's been really, really fun. And as I continue to do it, especially with like the juniors and the seniors, I see them starting to take ownership over it, which is really nice. And it's always nice because I always teach freshmen as well. So I love this experience of seeing them grow through the process of just that exercise alone.
That is so powerful. It is, you know, they'll say that teachers were not in it for the money, but to see the students grow, so powerful. And just very, very appreciative of the, you know, the spirit that you have as well, too, of that. I was touched by the issue that you brought up of safety, how important it is when we learn to feel that we're safe in that. And again, too, to allow your students to have the opportunity to make some suggestions maybe, or some opportunities. Hey, could we try this? Could we try that?
Yeah.
That would make me feel safe.
Well, I think too, like the contributions from students allows them to get ownership. And I'll say this too, you know, a safe space for me isn't going to be a safe space for somebody else, right? So also recognizing that. So the other thing that I really like to use is this idea of brave space, where we're not always going to get along. I teach dance history and I don't teach the history that I learned. And sometimes that can be difficult because we're hearing things for the first time or we're learning things for the first time. Just last week, we were talking about reggae music and a student was like, I had no idea that reggae music was protest music. And I was like, wow, okay, let's listen to Bob Marley's Buffalo Soldier. And none of them knew what a Buffalo Soldier was. And I can't vilify them for not knowing that, right? They didn't learn that. But it's a really exciting opportunity to get them to understand the ways in which some of the popular culture that we participate in, we might not exactly know what's going on. And so to offer a brave space of, again, I am fully prepared to admit to my students when they ask me a question and I don't know something, I am absolutely say, I don't know. And I don't know if that comes from my, my desire to maybe not have wanted to be an educator my whole life, that I was very much like, that's a whole lot of bags to open up. But I think in some ways, this idea of piquing curiosity and understanding that it's okay to disagree and to still have conversation around it and, you know, actively participate in sharing resources.
I think it's fascinating as well, too, bringing two subjects that maybe don't, or maybe we find difficult to connect, like history and dance, and to think, oh, we could learn about history through dance.
Yeah.
What a wonderful way to connect with some of your learners in a very physical approach. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. A couple of questions that I have for you. Talk to us about your discipline. Does dance have a discipline or a standard for the content that you teach with dance?
Sure. So it's really interesting. I know at the high school level, yes, but it's not federally mandated. So different states will have different standards for dance. So for instance, I know in Utah, the students predominantly study modern in high school and ballet, but there are folks that are starting to use and certainly teach jazz dance. But again, standard-wise, it's a little same thing with social dances like hip hop or house or whacking or things like that. Those aren't really standardized. So, and I also think in part because those don't come from Eurocentric ideologies, they aren't necessarily codified in ways that we understand education. They're difficult to then put into standards, although I don't think impossible and certainly something that we should be continuing to look at. But with respect to universities, so SUU belongs to the National Association of Schools of Dance. And so there are particular things that we have to address within our curriculum. So for instance, at the end of the semester, we meet with each and every one of our dance majors to look at sort of their trajectory in the program. And then we have to evaluate if they're, need improvement, good to go. I don't remember good to go. That's obviously not one of the standards, but certainly we have three.
It should be. It should be,
right? Good to go. I like that. But so we have these standards that we have to abide by. Like, yes, they are doing well, need improvement, or student not in good standing, I think are the three. So we meet with all of them. And I used to have that in my undergrad. And so I really like that. Every student also operates with a single mentor. So they're assigned a mentor, but of course, all of our doors are open and they can speak to whomever they feel most comfortable with. And it's just to make sure, because I think one of the unique things that a lot of people don't understand is a BA and BS in dance versus a BFA in dance are not the same degrees. So a BFA in dance is a professionalized degree where many of those students want to go into performance. And so getting things ready, like their resumes and their reels and their websites and their headshots and dance shots and all of those things are really geared in a BFA performance major. That said, many students take a BA program and still want to operate in that way. So that's where I think the mentorship here really comes in. And so I believe the two standards that we have that operate, that I really think operate well at SUU are this idea of each student has a mentor and that we meet with them collectively at the end of the semester. And we can say, okay, so in jazz class, this is happening, in ballet class, in tap class, in modern class, in dance history, and your, theoretical courses. How are you doing with your gen eds? Like all of those things, we have an opportunity to sit down and connect.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
With some of those, which standards specifically do you feel that you connect with most as an instructor? Would you share?
Oh, man. Well, I think I love mentoring students. My favorite, I don't know why, but my favorite thing to do with my students is to see them through from the academic world into the performance world. And I hesitate to call it the real world. I think that is complicated because we have some students who are dealing with real world consequences as we speak. So separating that feels a little challenging. So offering students even the opportunity, we had a chance to go and perform for National Suicide Awareness Day at the Capitol Theater in September. Bringing students there, we used a piece from, my piece last year was about 30 minutes, so we used a little section of that. And just to talk to the students about, okay, so what, how have we been touched by suicide? What are some things that we can bring to the table performing this piece? So I think just giving them the opportunities of like, this is what it's like to perform in the real world. Or again, I'm using real world, which is not my favorite thing, but this idea of connecting while still engaging in academic work. And then, I have students who still contact me from other universities that I've taught at, or, I taught at a dance studio. When I was living in New York City, I would commute to New Jersey a couple days a week and teach. And I still have students from there who ask me like, hey, I'm dancing professionally. Like, I don't like this contract. How do I operate? How do I talk about this? What do I, what are my rights? And, I'm not a lawyer. So the first thing I say is like, I'm not a lawyer. You should really go and ask a lawyer. But if you're uncomfortable, there are ways of navigating some conversations that might help to make the space feel more connected and authentic to you. And that is by far, like, I don't want to live vicariously through my students. I hope no one dances like me because we're all individuals and we all have an opportunity to showcase our experiences, lived experience, authenticity, and all of those things. And so I hope that they can find the movement to make it their own, because there isn't one path to the field, right? If you look at myself, if you look at Andrea, if you look at Alex, if you look at Seven, if you look at one of our former professors, Nick Blaylock or Casey Lee Thorne, we all have such different ways of arriving. Sometimes I think students are like, but I want the right answer. Like, look at us, there isn't one, and I think we're living proof. So that's really fun.
That is just so exciting that we can be our own. We are our own individuals, and there should be value in those individual natures. You've mentioned a couple of, from my teaching background, a couple of those 4 C's, the critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity. You really kind of touched or identified in all of those. Could you take a moment and talk to us a little about how you work with, the concept of critical thinking, using those higher order thinking skills of comparing and contrasting,
sure,
or problem solving? Are those involved in dance?
I think all the time. I think they operate both in a physical perspective and in a theoretical perspective. So problem solving, I'm thinking of like an anatomy class. So there are 2 labs that I don't teach the anatomy class here, but I certainly think we're dealing in anatomy and biomechanics every time we're taking a dance class. So there are 2 labs that I do specifically in jazz. So one is a hinges and layout clinic, and the other one is a leaps and turn clinic. And we look at it from, so for instance, not everyone's hips are going to align in a particular way. So what do you have to do to accomplish this thing? Whether that's a layout, whether that's a hinge, whether that's a particular turn or a particular leap. We're all different heights. I mean, we can even just take it from that perspective that like if the music is very, very, very fast, okay, so one might have to jump smaller or shorter than someone else. And that's just the ways in which we can operate, understanding how music works. Like if the music's very fast, okay, so how does that work in terms of our height, our the way our femur bones are stuck. I say stuck because my right hip doesn't feel great right now, but that are like in our acetabulum, right, in our hip socket. If the rotation isn't there, okay, so what can we do to find ways to support your individual body in a way to then still be able to accomplish the task without hurting yourself? Because I do think we're in a wonderful space right now where we can start to not injure ourselves for our art a little bit. Now we have to push, right? Like I say this in the same breath that like dancing is not easy. We are asked to be vulnerable every day of the week and twice on Sunday. We are asked to really show up in an authentic way. We're also sometimes very tired physically and mentally. So yes, there is this element of pushing. There's also this element of, okay, today this hip hurts. So what can I do? Can I still dance or should I not dance? Right? Having those questions. So even in the physicality. And then with respect to critical thinking skills, I mean, I do think that applies to critical thinking skills of my personal anatomy, but also, when we're reading articles where, there are not that many programs in America that have jazz as an equitable foundation with ballet and modern. Here at SUU, we do. And how jazz developed on American soil. We study ballet, we study modern quite a lot, but those actually aren't American art forms. And so it's interesting to me how the Academy has approached and wanted to maybe pedestal ballet and modern, but not jazz, even though jazz is American. So it becomes this complicated conversation where students are hearing, one of my favorite questions to ask the students is, have you heard of Bob Fosse? 9 times out of 10, it's usually in the affirmative. Have you heard of the Rockettes? 9 times out of 10, it's usually in the affirmative. And then when I ask, have you heard of Pepsi Bethel? Have you heard of Mabel Lee? Have you heard of Norma Miller? Have you heard of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers? 9 times out of 10, it's in the negative. And so just understanding we wouldn't have Bob Fosse if we didn't have these other forms that came before. And so having those critical conversations and dialogues, and not in a way to vilify their experiences or their training before they got here, because it's not, we know better to do better, right? But if we don't pique that curiosity, if we don't question, that becomes complicated. So I think even that, like suspending the beliefs that we thought we had or our own biases, whether that's explicit or implicit, and really investigating why we thought this was true. For instance, ballet is the foundation of dance. Well, people have been dancing for generations before ballet was ever created, so that can't be true. But what does that mean in the worlds that we operate in, right? And so we can continue to sort of pull it apart and open up and peer into the cauldron of like what could be.
Well, I think that's so touching, so profound in regards to really that the next C that I'd like you to address, that collaboration. You mentioned your work with your learners, making sure that they're feeling safe and comfortable. You mentioned working with your peers and how they come from so many different venues. What do your students take away from your collaborative skills to be able to identify for them some collaborative approaches that they may be able to use in other classes and in the world of work beyond academia?
Well, so we just had this conversation, I think last week or the week before, but that, dance can be seen as this very competitive, very I'm going to get mine thing. One of the things that I tried to explain to them was like, these people in this room are going to be the people that you're going to get to make art with for the rest of your life if you want, right? And now we're not all going to get along. That's, this utopian idea, I don't know, is also, right, we gravitate towards particular people. That is what it is. That's our human nature. But if we could suspend that competitiveness and really get at the heart of like, oh my gosh, wait a minute, I really like the way you do this and I really like the way you do that. Can we come together and create something new? And I've experienced that. I've been very, very, very lucky. The department has been very supportive of getting guest artists in here. So the pandemic has also made that a little bit more financially viable. So we had Michelle Gibson, the director of the New Orleans Buckshout. So teaching dances from New Orleans that show up in second line in New Orleans. And again, I mean, these are really important foundational structures of jazz dance. She taught an Afro-modern class. She taught an Afro-jazz class. And just in the ways in which we can see how just having that collaborative effect of meeting Michelle and saying, I teach jazz in Utah, so the exposure to jazz and even just seeing live dance is difficult here. Our students have to go to Vegas or they have to go up to Salt Lake. Yes, of course, Utah Shakespeare Festival is doing some wonderful musicals and sometimes there's dances and plays and the green shows. But in terms of dance being the catalyst for the performance, that we don't have that here right now. So we also partner with Jacob's Pillow's college program. We just received the funding to do that. And students can watch a live stream or recorded live performances. And I think that alone to say like, oh, right, if I don't make this connection with Jacob's Pillow, if I don't make this connection with Michelle Gibson, if I don't make this connection with we had somebody from Holla Jazz. It's a jazz dance company in Toronto, and I'm Canadian, so of course I'm supporting the Canadians. But again, during the pandemic, recognizing and realizing that like, wow, everyone has been affected by this. And then having the opportunity for students to ask questions, right? Like, oh, how's the pandemic treating you in Toronto? Like, how are you guys doing in terms of dance companies, right? Because these people had jobs, these people had their livelihood. And so even those bits of utilizing I call it like your network of individuals that can support your students, I think is a really wonderful way forward and a wonderful way for them to say like, oh, how did you all meet? And when did that happen? And, it's teaching them how to keep in touch and how to talk to people and what values they can bring to places that maybe they've never been before, both students and faculty. So that's been a really lovely experience. And I think for our students to see it in real time and during a pandemic, I think that was, like it could still be done. We could still do it. Does it feel the same? No, definitely not, right? Would it be wonderful to have folks in the room? And we have. Dr. James Walters was a dancer with River North Dance Chicago. Very good friend of mine is a chiropractor now and was at a chiropractic conference in Las Vegas. And I was like, well, do you just want to extend your ticket? Come, stay at my house. And, and then they got to learn some Frank Chavez choreography. So again, just this idea of like, it's all kind of connected. And, we have this, we know this 6 degrees of separation, right? And I think in dance, it might be less. I'm not sure. I don't, I have no science to back that up, but you can make these connections, and I've been lucky enough to dance around the world. And, I think that I continue to call people that I haven't spoken to in a long time and just be like, hey, what project are you working on? And how does this relate to mine? Or how does this relate to yours? Or how can I help you? I don't know. It makes you feel closer.
Danielle, what a wonderful opportunity I've had to experience your passion, to see your vision. Thank you so much for being a peer of mine on campus. Just one last question for you before we wrap up. As we're hoping, knocking on wood here, that there's going to be a good legislative year and we'll get more additional positions next year. As these new faculty come, any words of wisdom that you might have? You've succeeded so well here. You fit in so well with our society, with the mountains. Any words of wisdom for new faculty that may choose to come here even from Canada?
Sure. Yeah. I think, for me, my experience was difficult because the isolation that a new person can feel moving to a place that is unfamiliar is difficult. And then in COVID, it really kind of stopped that from even happening. And so, I think evaluating where places feel safe and brave and all of those things, I think is first and foremost, because we are people too. Like, I know we're faculty members and we're working really hard, but we also have to honor that gut feeling that we all have. So I know I certainly combated some feelings of isolation being, in New York City, you can walk out and get your meal at 3 o'clock in the morning and go see a performance every single night. And that kind of lively, like always on, right? City that never sleeps, so to speak. So for me, that felt very jarring. So I know for myself, I go down to Vegas once a month and I see a show and I have friends that live there and we go and we see dance, it's something that's exciting. So I think it's twofold. It's learning to put yourself out there and it's also honoring who you are as an individual. I don't know that I will ever be a fully grown adult. Sorry, Mom. But I do think that I know who I am. And I've investigated who I am and what I need, and communicating those needs, I think, are really important. And maybe not being afraid to have the difficult conversations that, like, this, something doesn't feel right. I want to address this with my, a colleague, a chair, an associate chair, whoever you feel like you can gravitate towards, but also that you have support to. That, I think, is the best experience for sure, because I don't want to ignore those feelings of isolation, but I also have had some really wonderful opportunities here for growth. I don't know. Then of course, leaning on those student success stories. I mean, there's nothing like it. There's nothing else in the world that can't push me forward when I see a student succeed, and whatever that is for them, right? If that's graduating and going and becoming a physical therapist, if that's graduating and going and dancing around the world, what does it matter for me? It just matters that they find that dance can live in their life in a healthy way.
Thank you for sharing that growth is so almost addictive, if I could use the word, to see it in our students. It's just so positive and powerful for us. Thank you again for sharing your vision and your passion with us. We're grateful to have you on campus, and we're grateful to have you a part of our SUU family. Friends, thank you so much for tuning in today to listen to this podcast. We hope it's been as entertaining, as enjoyable as it has been for me. Please continue. We'll have more guests next month, and we're appreciative of your time and effort. Thank you again, Danielle.
Thank you so much.